15 years old, at least 15 years old.
Right.
They have to, they can't drive after 10 p.m.
Well, for the first 3 months, they can't drive after dark.
They can't drive after dark.
Right.
Okay. And then for the remainder of that time period, they can't drive after 10 p.m.
That's correct.
They always have to have a licensed driver in the car with them.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And anything else? Did I leave anything out?
No, you didn't.
Okay.
But let me just say that they may choose to have that learner's license for longer than 1 year. Okay, is a minimum of 1 year.
Okay.
And a minimum age of 15. We're seeing more teens that are not getting learner's licenses until they're a little bit older than that. And again, they're going to have to hold it a minimum of 1 year, unless they turn 18.
Okay.
We have another stage in our driving,
There, that's why we're
and
here.
that's our intermediate stage, which is on the next screen. You'll see that at the intermediate stage, once they have taken a driving test and passed the driving test, they will be issued an operator's license, which has certain restrictions on it. Now, the restrictions for a 16-year-old vary from a 17-year-old. For a 16-year-old, they can drive between 6 a.m. and 11 p.m. without that adult in the car.
Without the adult.
Right.
Okay.
Now, at 17 years old, it expands just a little bit. They can drive from 5 a.m. to 1 a.m.
Okay. So you're stretching the hours in which they could drive.
Right. Now, and let me point out that there are two exceptions to these driver hour restrictions. One is that they are going to or from work, and the other is that they have the adult driver over 21 sitting beside them in the car. But those are the only exceptions to this rule.
And where do they go to take their tests?
Oh, well, they can take the driving test at any license office, and we actually in Florida have tax collectors in many counties who now give the driving test. In some counties, it's still the Florida Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles as the sole location for taking the test.
And I'm going to go back a second. So on their first stage, you said they also had to take a course, did you say?
Yes.
Where do they go to take that course?
That course can be taken in a number of places. They can take it online. You could just simply Google the name of the course, which is the 4-hour Substance Abuse and Traffic Safety Laws course. Or they can take the course in person, and there are a number of providers that have classroom courses where they can go to take the class.
And do you recommend one over the other?
Well, I think it all depends on the teen, and I've known teens that have done it online and some done it in the classroom. Now, my daughter went to the classroom, and there was a lot of good interaction with the teacher and the other students in the class, so I think she found that worked out well for her.
Yeah.
But we have so many young people today that are accustomed to learning online and in virtual school that they could do quite well if they took it online.
Got it.
There is a standard curriculum, so
Okay.
it wouldn't matter which place you went. The name of that course is Traffic Law and Substance Abuse Education.
And they can find that out through your website, which is Drive
With Care.
Drive
yes.
with Care. And at the end of these slides, we actually have a link to your website. So if you can't remember what we're talking about, you can go to those resources at the end. Now they've got their license, now what?
Okay, well, once they pass the 17-year-old time period and they turn 18, now there are no driving restrictions. That is a full operator's license.
Mm-hmm.
So now, Jillian, this is contradictory to what we used to have at age 16. I remember when I was a 16-year-old driver, at 16, I could drive alone. So the law now is there are times for 16-year-old and 17-year-olds that you, at 16 and 17, you're not free to roam anymore. It's up until you're 18. Is that correct?
Right. After that time period at night, which we just went over, 11 p.m. for 17 or 1 a.m., for 16, or 1 a.m. for 17, then you cannot be driving around with your friends in the car.
Now we have their driver's license. They're 18 years old, and now comes the scary part. So, and one of the dangers that we all face with our teens is impaired driving. So Danielle, tell us a little bit about what is impaired driving and what are the statistics like?
Well, just in speaking about teen drivers as a whole, I mean, these are young people who have never had the experience of driving before, have never had this level of responsibility before, and we're asking them to learn these skills, have this awareness, understand the laws, plus maintain control of the vehicle while riding down the road. Just as an interesting statistic, driving is the most dangerous activity for anyone under the age of 25. So driving for this age group is actually more dangerous than the next 3 causes of death combined.
That's amazing. Say that again, because that's an amazing statistic.
Driving for anyone under 25 is more dangerous than the next 3 causes of death combined. So just thinking of this as a whole, your children are more in danger of being in a fatality by driving a car. So parents, all the more reason to educate them on skills and awareness every day. So while we're talking about impaired driving, number 1, Florida law says it is illegal for anyone under the age of 21 to consume alcohol. Considering that's the law, you wouldn't think it would be an issue that anyone under the age of 21, such as our teen drivers, would be subject to impaired driving. However, we all are well aware that this is not the case. In fact, alcohol kills more children than any other illegal drugs combined. So
that's an amazing statistic too.
Yes, and unfortunately over 5,000 people under the age of 21 die as a result of underage drinking annually. So this is not an uncommon thing, and it is a very prevalent risk for our underage drivers.
And the sad thing about that is it's a preventable thing.
Absolutely, it's a choice we're making. These kids aren't getting this alcohol on their own. Someone is helping them to procure that. So another responsibility as parents and as adults as a whole, it's the law. We shouldn't be providing this alcohol to underage people, period. Now, something to consider. The law says under 21 you're not allowed to drink. In addition to that, it has open container law. Now, when we're talking about open container, the law states that that's anything that's in immediate accessibility or has the seal broken. So, parents, you go shopping with Bobby or Susie, and you're driving home, and you're like, oh, drop me off at Grandma's house, and you take the groceries home. Keep in mind, if you got Dad's 6-pack sitting in the front seat with the groceries, should Bobby or Susie drive a little too fast or run through a checkpoint at some point, and that alcohol is accessible to them just by location, and you are not in the car with them to support that alcohol, they could be cited for driving with open container.
That never even occurred to me.
So, something to consider as parents. Parents, this applies to you as well with the open container law. So it's accessible or the seal is broken. Now, when we talk about the definition of driving under the influence, driving under the influence means that you have proved impairment of normal faculties, and that's proven by either an unlawful blood alcohol breath test or just the physical appearance of impairment. Now, driving under the influence doesn't necessarily mean cars in gear and driving down the road. Under the implied consent law, if you actually have possession, it's called physical control of the vehicle, you are responsible for your condition while behind the wheel. So another thing to note, okay, your team makes the choice to consume some alcohol, and they get behind the wheel, and they have enough judgment to say, I'm impaired and I need not drive any further. They pull off the side of the road and they choose to sleep it off. Okay, they're sitting on the side of the road, or they pulled into a parking lot, and so law enforcement comes by to check out the situation, what's going on. Officer, I'm just parked, I'm tired, what have you. Sir or ma'am, have you been drinking tonight? They may or may not be able to prove that just by the way they smell or what have you, but should it be proved later on that even though they're not moving, even though they are parked, if they are impaired by alcohol, they are again subject to driving under the influence. Now keep in mind that for teen drivers or any driver under 21, that BAC level is not 0.08, it is actually 0.02. Now, considering the law says you shouldn't consume alcohol, why would we have that level of 0.02? Understanding that alcohol is not necessarily what you drink. It can be found in medication or something that you're taking that would cause those levels to be elevated.
Like NyQuil or something like
correct,
that.
Correct. Anything with an alcohol-based type medication or so forth. So that could cause a slightly elevated level of blood alcohol concentration. However, it would not necessarily induce impairment. So for teens, that level is 0.02 as compared to the law for anyone over 21, which is 0.08.
Mm-hmm.
So say your teen chooses to make this decision, or actually anyone under 21 chooses to make this decision, and they are convicted with, or they're proven to have a blood alcohol concentration of over 0.2. They receive an automatic administrative suspension of their license for 6 months. In order to relinquish that suspension, they must make a court appearance and request to have that license restored to them. Now, if they are under an operator's license, they may have the opportunity to request a hardship license where they can travel to and from work or to and from school only. However, that is up to the judge or the administrative hearing officer at the time to determine whether that is a feasible solution for that particular offense.
Well, hold on. Let's back up a little bit. So let's go back to your story about the teen who has felt that they can no longer control the car properly, so they've pulled over and they've gone to sleep. So you're telling me that kid, even though they made the good decision of not driving, is still susceptible to being arrested or getting a DUI just by virtue of still being in the car?
One thing I failed to mention is another part of Florida's implied consent law is that when you take physical control of a vehicle, you are subject to being tested at any point for blood alcohol concentration. So just by being behind the wheel, you are having physical control. So whether you are actually driving down the road, but if you maintain physical control of that car, you're the only one in the car, or even if there's someone, say, younger and not able to drive alone, you are the legally operating person of the car, and you are behind the wheel, and you are impaired, you are subject to the laws for driving under the influence.
So it's seen actually like you're driving a major weapon, and because you could cause unimaginable pain with that car if you're not able to drive it properly, operate it properly.
And again, that law just doesn't only apply to our teens. That is the law for all drivers.
So if that teen has made the good decision not to drive, but they're still liable because they're in control of the car even though it's parked, what should they do instead?
Well, never, ever, 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 ever get behind the wheel after consuming alcohol. I mean, make that decision. Should you choose to do it, have a designated driver. We hear that all the time. Most people, not everyone is drinking. Not everyone is doing it. Statistics show that if you really look around and at peers in high schools and so forth in colleges, that not everyone is doing it. There is someone who is not, or there is someone that you can call to help you do that. Even some of the bars and so forth have cabs and services available to get you there. Now, maybe the question is, can you be in the back seat? I'm assuming is that if you're in the back seat asleep, well, if there's no one else in the car, you still maintain physical control of that car. The assumption is you got it there, you were impaired to get it there, you didn't go have a drink and then fall asleep in the parking lot. You maintain physical control of that. Again, that's for legalese to decide, but just kind of an overview for the law, that's a good understanding.
And some of this is, we think about harm reduction and trying to encourage teens to have a plan before they go out, that they're not going to drive and drink, that it's good to think about those things before they
even
out,
even leave the house.
And if they are going to drink, to have a plan of how they're going to get home, whether it's a designated driver or call their parents.
Right.
If we can back up 2 slides just for a second, I wanted to point out that for our young drivers, for every fatal crash that involves young drivers, 1 out of 4 of those crashes also involved alcohol. So a quarter of the fatality rate as far as crashes go for young drivers, alcohol was involved. Again, further putting that statistic out there that impaired driving is a significant risk for young drivers.
And that's so important for, I think, for all of us as adults to remember. 1 in 4 teens. So you think about all the teens you know that multiplies the possibility of having a driving impaired crash that could be avoided.
I mentioned the implied consent law. By taking physical control of the vehicle, you are subject to implied consent. By taking control of the vehicle, you are subject to an alcohol testing. Should you refuse, you are automatically suspended for 12 months. Now, we saw in the previous slide that if you blow over 0.02, it's an administrative suspension of 6 months. So by refusing, you're automatically adding an additional 6 months suspension to your license. Should you be so inebriated that you choose to refuse a second time, then that would be an additional suspension for 18 months. So keeping in mind these consequences you are subject to the law, and the law says you will submit, and should you choose to not submit, then you will have a penalty attributed to that.
So these are the legal possibilities, the legal ramifications. Tell us also, how much is that going to cost you?
Well, on average, $15,000 is the average cost for the DUI arrest. On our next slide, we talk about some additional consequences for things such as ignition interlock or extended suspensions and then incarcerations. Ignition interlock is an actual device that is installed into your vehicle that prevents the ignition from turning on without you actually blowing into that breath test apparatus to regulate your breath test level at that point. So basically you're doing a sobriety test every time you get in the car. Now there's a cost involved with the installation of this equipment and also a monthly maintenance fee associated with this equipment. So should you be subject to ignition interlock, outside of the court fees, outside of the license reinstatement fees, outside of your attorney fees, you may have to pay this monthly ignition interlock fees. Should your offense be so heinous, the judge may agree to extend your suspension longer than the 12 or 18 months or 6 months as we described in the previous slides. Should you kill someone or injure someone significantly or cause significant property damage to an absorbent level, you could also be subject to incarceration. Again, these apply to everyone, not just our teen drivers, but you know, as we're thinking about consequences, the monetary and the just permanent record and inconvenience of making these decisions can definitely be avoided.
Well, I still can't get over the $15,000 it would cost just to get a DUI. It's just not worth it, is it?
No, it never is.
It never is. And what about tobacco then?
Oh, as another thing to mention, the law for driving for our teens, law prevents tobacco use in anyone under the age of 18. Any driver convicted of possession of alcohol, possession of tobacco is subject to an automatic suspension for 6 months to a year, depending on how much or what have you in that regard. So teens, should you choose to smoke in your car, you could lose your license as well. In addition, driving impaired is not limited to alcohol. It can also be subject to medications or drugs, not necessarily illicit drugs, however those are definitely in the causation. However, it seems that more over-the-counter medications like NyQuil or even the interaction of maybe your daily medication and say a cough medicine that makes you drowsy or impairs your abilities while moving down the highway. Prescription drugs that may be prescribed to you for pain, you had your tooth pulled, you're taking your Vicodin to help you out there. On that medicine bottle it says, do not operate a vehicle. These say these things for a reason, and should you choose to ignore that warning and get behind the wheel, and an officer can prove that you were impaired to the point that you don't need to be driving, again, you are subject to driving under the influence.
So in other words, anything that's going to make you the least bit woozy or unclear in your head, then you should not be behind the wheel.
Exactly. If you don't feel right, you know, even if you're stressed or, you know, just emotionally out of sorts, always you want to maintain control. So What physical and mental state are you in before you get behind the wheel? Just be aware and act accordingly.
And make wise decisions. The hot topic these days is distracted driving. I know we just had a summit here where the Secretary LaHood came and spoke. And part of distracted driving, of course, everyone always thinks of the cell phone, but it covers so much more. So Julianne, can you just cover a little bit, basically what is distracted driving?
Distracted driving is anything that takes our awareness away from driving, and it can be visual, it can be manual, or it can be cognitive. For example, if you're reading a map or you're checking your GPS, those would be visual distractions while you're driving down the road. Manual ones are when you take your hands off of the wheel of the car. You've got two hands, they both should be on the wheel of the car at all times. What happens is when people are holding the steering wheel and then they let go with one hand to reach for something, that other arm starts to move up. When that other arm starts to move up on the steering wheel, then you are turning that car, and that's how cars crash into the trees off the side of the road, mailboxes, the car behind them. It's because they have only one hand to control that steering wheel while they're looking down to reach for something else. This happens every day.
I'll tell you, my high school gym teacher, and I graduated in 1970, so I remember in high school, she had lost her right hand because her purse was on the front seat. She had to brake for something that flew. She reached for her purse and lost control of the car, and now she has no right hand. And that stayed with me forever. Whatever falls on the floor stays on the floor.
Exactly, exactly. Now, the third type of distracted driving is cognitive, and that's where we don't have our mind on driving. And this also happens all the time. You can ask someone, did you notice something down the roadway when you were driving home today or to work today? No, I don't know whether that was there or not. Well, if they can't answer the question and they don't know if something was there, their mind wasn't on driving. So cognitive skills are very important, that we are paying very close attention when we're driving. And for teens, it's even more important because there's so much going on around their vehicle, and learning to scan and to recognize everything with your visual, then you've got to have your mind that's saying, okay, I see a half a block ahead, somebody is making a left turn, I need to do a certain thing with my car so that I stay safe. Another part about cognitive driving that I'd like to share is emotions. It is never a good idea for anyone to get behind the wheel of a car if they're angry, upset, overly excited, because in those cases, that's what's on the forefront of our mind, not driving. And we all know that teens are very emotional young people, and that's part of the excitement about teens. And I think as parents, you know, we love to see them happy and joyful. However, we want to keep our teens safe, and that means if they are not feeling calm, be the person that they can call and say, Mom, I had a bad day, or I'm just overly excited about what's going on. Would you mind coming and picking me up?
So in a nutshell, to not be a distracted driver, you have to make sure that you're aware visually of your surroundings, of what's going on. You have to be in control of that steering wheel. Remember the old days, I don't know if they still teach you young, but what was it?
It's 10 and 2.
10 and 2.
It used to be 9 and 3.
Yeah, that's it. Okay. So, you know, have control of the steering wheel in the car so that you're manually present, and also mentally to be aware of that you're driving this car, and not only what you're doing, but what everybody else is doing around you. And I wish I could say that there have been times when I pulled out of the driving lot after having a very stressful day at work and thinking about all the things that were still on my task list, and the next thing I knew I was home, didn't even know how I got there.
Absolutely.
So we need to be mindful, visually, manually, and mentally.
Definitely.
So tell us some of the scary statistics that are going on these days.
Well, they are pretty scary. There were over 3,000 people that were killed in crashes that involved distracted driving. And that was in 2010 alone. and there were an estimated 416,000 additional people who were injured in crashes involving a distracted driver. And I want to call your attention to the third point on this slide, because texting and the use of mobile devices has become so widespread in our country that in June of 2011, more than 196 billion text messages were sent or received.
I can't even conceive of that.
And that's in
it
just
is
1
huge.
month.
And that's in
Yes,
1 month.
1 month. And that was
196 billion.
that was up 50% from the previous June of 2009. So that is quite frightening, because you know, when someone's sending a text message, okay, they don't have both hands on the steering wheel, they don't have both eyes on the road, and their mind certainly is not on driving. So they have then taken up every form of distraction that they could at one point.
Julianne, that's such an excellent point as we talk about texting and driving, because that involves all three levels of distracted driving: your visual, your manual, and your cognitive. It's one of those kind of self-explanatory this is risk-taking in doing it, and it's not safe, and we really should not be doing it while driving. I mean, you are 23 times more likely to be involved in an accident, and that accident is 23 times more likely to be worse or fatal, or the injuries or the damages that are caused 23 times worse. Something I wanted to share, Danielle, you mentioned our distracted driving summit that we had recently in November, hosted with USAA. There was a professor of psychology, Dr. Cass, from the University of West Florida, and he shared some interesting statistics. We can see right now texting is bad. It takes out all your faculties, but we have those that'll say, if I'm talking on the telephone, then I'm not as bad as texting. Okay, yes, you're right. It's not all three faculties. However, just by having a conversation, it does impair your ability to drive safely. What Dr. Cass showed was he evaluated novice drivers, a couple of novice drivers in the simulator, and it evaluated their ability to scan, ability to react to decisions, and it just weighed out their behaviors. It counted the number of good driving behaviors against the number of bad driving behaviors. Then he compared that with an experienced driver, drivers over 40 with great skills and great experience, and of course, side by side, you could see the novice driver's bad skills were far less than that of the experienced driver. So,
That makes sense.
he took those two subjects, those two categories, and then just added the handheld conversation. So they're driving down the road having a conversation. Their minds are out and they're driving. Okay, so we've got the cognitive, again, manual with handheld, and then visual they can still see, right? So when adding that element in the simulation, the results were as expected. You could see that driving behaviors for both subjects on the bad category were elevated compared to what they had done without the distraction. But something I found most interesting was that of the experienced 40-plus driver. When you looked at the amount of errors they made compared to the good driving decisions just by holding that phone or having that conversation, it matched exactly to that novice driver without a conversation. So in summary, even the most experienced driver, while adding a telephone conversation, makes you drive like an unskilled motorist.
There you go.
So, and that's just
So it's not just for teen drivers, but for all drivers. We need to leave the phone aside.
So our teen drivers are just all that more at risk for fatalities with that added thing. And another thing to note was that the distraction was equally the same whether it was handheld or hands-free, because it was a cognitive distraction as a whole. So that having your mind out of the conversation caused those errors just as bad as having that handheld phone and having that conversation.
So was that when you say hands-free, you mean they're still on a cell phone, but it's like through the speakers of the car kind
Correct,
of thing?
or the Bluetooth, whatever.
Or the
It's
Bluetooth.
still that cognitive distraction.
No, but what about having a conversation with somebody in the car as opposed to on the phone?
What they mentioned was with the conversation in the car, you have two sets of eyes that are both situationally aware. If your passenger is with you and you're having a conversation and you're driving down the road, your passenger is subject to the same environmental aspects as you are. Your person on the other line does not see what's going on. Right. Your passenger can see someone run out in front of the road and go, "Hey, stop!" Right. Your conversation has no clue and has no ability to let you relax and concentrate on the road because you are so engrossed in that telephone conversation.
That's really interesting. Okay, so the bottom line of that is we just should not be on our cell phones and driving at the same time, whether it's handheld or whether it's a cell phone that you're actually using. Tell us what else you know about distracted driving.
Well, in addition to, we talked about the conversations in the car. Our novice drivers, in their learner's permit and their intermediate operators, they have to have an adult present. Okay, so that's one passenger in the car. That's an adult that's there to supervise their driving. Okay, so now you add a passenger. Say they're driving, they're 16, and they don't have to have that license, that adult license driver. They've got their best friend and sitting next to them, and they're talking about all the great things they're going to do tomorrow and all the wonderful things that are going on, and they're excited and they're engrossed in that conversation. Well, as teens, as we talked about earlier, they are so emotionally charged, which causes that additional cognitive distraction. Statistics show that teen driving with 2 or more teen passengers increases the chance of crash by 5 times. So you are 5 times more likely to crash by every teen passenger you have. So if you have teens, if you have one buddy riding with you, you are automatically 5 times more likely to get in a crash. And then that number increases exponentially as you add additional buddies. So basically, a clown car full of teens is a recipe for disaster.
I know when I first read that, that just blew me away. You know, it's bad enough they're being distracted, but you never think, I mean, how many times as a teenager did you get in your car and you had all your friends and you went on a run? It just didn't occur to me how much that impacted the driver. And of course, part of that is maturity, it's skill, it's practice, it's all of that. But just having that extra team, those extra passengers in the car, parents, please just don't let it happen. But what about if they have to, if they're being chauffeurs to their teens or to their siblings, or, well, how do you handle that?
You know, we as parents, we look forward to that day that our kids turn 16 and they can take a brother and sister to school and they can take them to practice, and it's a freedom for us to pass that on. Again, keeping in mind that driving is the most dangerous thing for anyone under the age of 25. So by adding your children, your younger children, in the car with your novice driver, not only is your novice driver at risk alone by being behind the wheel, but then you're also subjecting your younger children to that additional risk of fatality or injury due to driving in a car. I mean, you know it's stressful enough as mom to hear "mommy, mommy, mommy" in the back. Imagine how your 16-year-old novice driver feels with the stress of "sissy, sissy, sissy" or blah, 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 blah in the back, just adding to that pressure.
That's right. So Ellen, now as a parent of teens, tell us what you're going through.
Well, I am a parent of teens. That's my most important job. I also work at the Department of Children and Families in substance abuse prevention. So I try to bring some of those messages home to my teens. I have a 16-year-old son who's a relatively new driver, and then an 18-year-old daughter who is a freshman in college. So we've been through all of the trials and tribulations of having teen drivers. We've had the fender benders, we've had the speeding tickets, and we've had also a completely totaled car. So I have been through the ups and downs of that. And we have a big challenge on our hands in the United States. We give our kids cars when they're younger than in all other countries. 16 is a very young age. And I was surprised to learn that, 16-year-olds are 3 times more likely to have an accident than other age groups. So we know that in the amount of insurance we pay, but seeing that statistic...
And research shows us that those first, 2 or 3 months after your license, that's when you're the most likely to have a crash?
Yes, absolutely. And really, they're not experienced until they have well over 1,000 miles of driving experience, and that takes a long time.
And I also find that with my both of my children, but maybe more my son, they do feel invincible. They are teenagers.
It's never going to happen to me.
They don't understand the consequences and risks. And I also heard from them that, oh, accidents are no big deal. Everybody has them. So they're desensitized. Because of the statistics that we shared, teens do have a lot of accidents. So they regard them as maybe not a big deal. So they really don't understand consequences very well, from my own experience, what I've been able to find. But there are things that parents can do. I mean, we've learned today about the laws in Florida, which I think are very solid and give parents the tools that they need to work with their teen drivers.
Oh, actually, I'm gonna contradict you a little bit in that we have one of the weakest GDL laws, and we are working on trying to strengthen those laws, aren't we?
I was very pleased that it was a full year, that they had to have it, not when they turned 16. When I was like Danielle here, I mean, I could have a full license at 16 regardless of how many months I had.
It's certainly better than when
the entire year of driving with your parent or someone over 21, I think was extremely well crafted. And I knew kids that didn't get their learner's permit at age 15. They waited a couple months, maybe because they weren't organized enough to get down and do the tests, and they had to wait past 16 because they didn't have that entire year. Also, I think the driving to 11 o'clock, that restriction, I think is a great benefit. Coming from another state and having experienced another state, I think Florida is a lot better.
You've got two teens. What did you learn from the first one that you did differently with the second one?
Well, I think for both of them, and I think it's an important, and you can go back a slide, that we are driving role models, that we have to be aware, as in all of our behaviors, that they have been observing us drive for many, many years. So how we behave in the car is important. Are we driving distracted? Are we using our cell phones? Are we speeding? So we really have to take some responsibility in that arena.
I'm so happy to hear you say that, Ellen, because when I go out and do presentations at my SAD chapters across the state, middle and high school, the number one thing I hear from the audience members, these teens, is that why should I give up my texting and driving? Why should I wear my seatbelt? Why should I practice good safe driving skills when mom or dad or the older sibling are not?
And maybe a way to have that conversation is to make a driving contract with your teen, and we've provided you a link to just one of many. This one is from the Center for Disease Control, and I found it particularly good in terms of comprehensive, but perhaps that contract could be used as a conversation, that if I'm having my teen sign that they shouldn't be texting, then maybe they would feel the opportunity to ask, well, why do you get to text if I'm not being allowed to text? So that's one of the practical things that I think that we can encourage parents to do, and I think it's very powerful. I wish that I had done it with my teens. I just wasn't aware of it. So this kind of webinar would have helped me. And then lastly, I just want to remind people that, the holidays are upon us, parties are upon us, and that remember in Florida, as we said earlier on this webinar, that we have a zero tolerance for underage drinking and driving law. So please do not serve your teen a glass of champagne on New Year's Eve, and particularly if she's going out to a party afterwards. And let's collectively work as parents to have a safe holiday season. And parents, you play your part in making sure that your child is safe and our communities are safe.
Excellent. So we've learned the steps of how to get your driver's license. We've learned the awful statistics about being impaired or distracted, and the importance of just saying no and of practicing responsible decision making. And we've learned that parents, you are a major influencer on your teens. Your teens are looking to you and they're emulating you. It's up to you to have a dialogue with them before they even get behind the wheel, so that you have a contract or some sort of understanding on what to do and how to do it. And so I thank you, ladies, so much for being here and for being part of this panel discussion. All of us, we've shared our email addresses with you on the slide presentation. So if after this webinar is concluded, you would like to ask us individually some questions, we're happy to do that.
Well, thank you all. Thank you to all the panelists. I think it's just wonderful information. I think that I guess the one message that I took away is that absolutely none of us should be on the road driving. That's the bottom line. Because none of us, as Eddie is saying, none of us should be on the road driving because we're all stressed out, we're all distracted, we're not paying attention, trying to focus. The cell phone has certainly made us all distracted. We're distracted in meetings. We have a lot of difficulty being present. So the real challenge that we all face is how to make this information relevant, believable, and so people will participate with us and that we can focus on our message and what we're trying to do.